Welcome to AI Driven, a podcast about using AI for business. AI Driven is produced and hosted by Cognistx, an AI company based in Pittsburgh with offices in the US, Latin America, and Asia. Happy New Year and welcome to the first episode of AI Driven of 2024. We're kicking off the new year with the focus on AI technology that will propel your business and empower your team to work more efficiently. So what could that be? Well, have you heard of Retrieval Augmented Generation, or what's commonly known as RAG? So RAG is a method for enhancing the accuracy and the reliability of generative AI models using facts from external sources. And to help us understand the importance of RAG is Cognistx data scientist Justin Waltrip. Welcome, Justin.
Hi, Patty.
Happy New Year.
Yeah, Happy New Year to you as well.
So now you heard the little description I gave of RAG. I was hoping that you could really expand on that and tell us more about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So RAG is a really advanced natural language processing technology that has been used to dramatically improve the performance of anything really that has to do with language models. And when I say language models, you can think of something like ChatGPT. And it really refers to anything that can produce human sounding text, something that sounds like it was written by an author or at least a real human being. And so the way that RAG, or Retrieval Augmented Generation, works is it's a little bit complicated, but I think I'll kind of break it down into steps. And so the traditional way that a language model actually produces text is by looking back at what you've asked it, and then for each word, it tries to predict what it thinks the next word will be. So when you ask ChatGPT who won the World Series, it will look at the text that you just said, and then when it tries to produce its output, it will look at all of the possible words it could choose, and it will try to pick which one it thinks is the most likely. So if you ask who won the World Series in 2002, it will look at all the possible words, and maybe the first word it chooses is a specific team. And then the next word that it chooses is one, because it thinks that's the most likely based on what it's seen already and the query that you've asked it. And then finally, it'll produce at a certain output, and that's what it thinks is the most likely answer to what you've asked, and it'll return that back to you. So that's kind of the standard process for how a language model actually provides a response. It really just looks at what it thinks is the most likely word, and it goes through all of the words, and then when it feels like it's satisfied that it's provided enough answer to you, it'll just stop and return. And so for question answering, what you could do is anytime you ask some kind of question, you can just rely on what the language model was trained on. So say you were asking a lot of questions about baseball, and your language model was trained on a bunch of old games of baseball and descriptions and maybe news articles that had been written about baseball. If you train it for long enough on a lot of that baseball content, eventually it will be able to just answer some of those questions without relying on any external sources. It'll just be able to know, oh, this specific team won in this specific year, and this specific player is doing a really good job, because it was trained on that data so much that it basically learns to memorize that content. And whenever it goes to answer your question, it knows which word should come next really well because it was trained on all of that data. And now the only problem with that process, and where retrieval augmented generation comes in, is that you sometimes need to answer questions about documents that weren't in your original training data set. And so let's say that I am a company and I have a bunch of like internal company documents. Maybe I am a restaurant and I have like an employee training handbook, and that isn't publicly available on the web. In that case, a company like OpenAI, when they go and they scrape the internet to find a lot of training sources, they wouldn't have access to this particular document. And so if I ask ChatGPT, what is the company policy on clothing for my specific company, it's not going to have any idea how to respond. It just has no way of knowing that information. And so what retrieval augmented generation does is it first looks at the document that you've provided and it finds sections in that document that are relevant to the particular question that you're asking. So if I'm asking about human resources policies or the clothing policy, it's going to first use other machine learning methods besides large language models to break down your document and find the important section of that document that might contain the information that you're looking for. And then when the language model is actually trying to answer your question, instead of only providing that question to the language model like ChatGPT, you also provide those small sections of the document. And you're basically saying, based on this information that I'm providing to you, now try to answer my question. And so when the language model produces an answer, it isn't just basing that answer on the documents that it was trained on during the actual training process, but now it's actually using the context that you provided to answer your question. And so that's kind of the basis for what retrieval augmented generation does. It first retrieves the relevant documents and then generates the response based on that retrieval. And that's how it's able to augment or kind of rely on sources outside of the original training data set.
So are a lot of the answer engines or the new AI kind of powered platforms that we're seeing, are they using RAG or not all of them? Like you mentioned ChatGPT doesn't seem to be using it, or does it?
So we don't have a ton of insight all the time into exactly how these products are built, because one thing that I think a lot of people don't realize is that ChatGPT and GPT-4, they aren't just models. Like if you think of in a data science sense, a model is just a bunch of numbers, and you put in an input, it gives you an output, and it's deterministic, which means that every time you put in the same input, it's going to give you exactly the same output. And that model, it doesn't change day to day or year to year. Like it's just a fixed set of numbers, and so that doesn't change. Whereas OpenAI, when you query ChatGPT or GPT-4, there's a lot of kind of pre-processing that happens to your input where it might decide what kind of information you're looking for or whether you're searching on a topic that's kind of sensitive or risky. And then when it produces the output, when it finally does query whatever kind of model or models, they could be using multiple, when it finally finishes processing, it is going to do a lot of post-processing as well. And so it might like look at the answer and decide whether that answer is toxic or would be bad from a PR perspective for OpenAI, and they might censor the output that the model is producing. So in that way, these products, we don't actually have a lot of insight into exactly what they are doing. And because of that, we don't really know what their limitations are. So if I ask ChatGPT about like some kind of modern topic, I don't know if it's relying on what it was trained on, which might only go up to 2022 or 2023, but maybe those news sources aren't actually part of its training data set, or if it's actually like dynamically searching the internet and finding those sources and then basing whatever it generates on that text that might have been released like yesterday. So RAG or Retrieval Augmented Generation does definitely improve the performance when it is used, but when you're dealing with some of these companies, you don't actually know exactly what kind of technologies are on the underside.
Right, and I was going to ask you, well, then how are people using RAG? I know you gave some examples, like you can't really tell if someone's if a platform is using RAG or not. But for example, with Bard and web search, is that something that where you see RAG has been applied?
Yeah, so there are definitely some cases specifically, and Bard, like you mentioned, is a really good one because in order for it to do web search, it is effectively doing retrieval augmented generation. It first uses your question to find relevant websites that the source of those websites might actually contain the answer to your question, and then it's actually reading the content of those websites, finding the relevant like paragraphs that might matter, and then it's trying its best to answer that question based on these websites. And usually it'll try to like provide some of those websites as well to you, so you can kind of roughly get an idea of what it used to generate that answer, and maybe you'll be able to like go in and check or verify some of those sources, or just make sure that it's kind of doing its due diligence in terms of actually doing proper research before providing an answer. And so that's one way. But also, we talked about question answering. So if you are working with a company that says that it can do something specific to your particular company data, or data that isn't available publicly, then there's no way that these large language models that are trained by these companies could have trained on that data. And so in that context, the only way that you're really going to get any useful information from a language model is by doing retrieval augmented generation, where it first finds the relevant sections in your data and then tries to answer the question. But there are also cases for like text summarization or text completion, where you might need to the retrieval step might be really important to find kind of the most important sections of a document, or in the case of text completion, it might be important to look back at your chat history and find the most important kind of statements that you've said in the past that might be relevant to what you're asking now. And so there are a lot of different situations where using RAG can really improve the performance of the results that you're seeing and make them much more contextualized to the specific situation that you're in.
So does Cognistx use RAG in any of its products?
Yeah, so our product Square is a question answering system, and we absolutely use RAG because it's really, really important for us working in a lot of like risk sensitive domains to be able to validate the actual answers that we are providing to the user. And so in our case, if there is, say, a long legal document that someone is asking questions about, then they may ask something like, can I terminate this agreement if I fail to pay on time? And that's a pretty reasonable question, but it's also something that's really important to the user. If they are a paralegal, it's really critical that the system doesn't just say, yes, you can terminate, or no, you can't terminate, because that might actually change how they deal with that client. And it could be a lot of money wasted if they try to do something that isn't actually supported by that particular contract. And so in our case, our system in that domain is first going to look for relevant sections like the termination clause, and then the large language model is going to use that clause and that paragraph to actually try to answer the question. But when we provide that answer, we're not only just saying, here's the answer, like yes or no. We are trying to answer that question, and then we're providing sources that point directly to places in the document where that answer might actually be from.
So that makes it quite a powerful tool. So what's the future of RAG?
Well, RAG is one of the most effective techniques we have right now to reduce hallucinations, which is just where language models say something that isn't really based on any actual source or any context. And that's really important for situations where the the documents that you're asking questions about or kind of what you're querying a chatbot about isn't based on super publicly available data. And one of the best cases of this is actually personal AI systems. So let's think like you have a computer at home, presumably, and that computer has documents on it. It might have old tax records, it might have childhood videos, it might have pictures that have text in them, or you have a lot of personal documents. And right now, maybe you have some kind of organization to them, maybe you don't, but someday it's conceivable that using retrieval augmented generation, instead of having to search on your computer for the exact like file name, like 2023 W2 form, if you're looking for old tax records, you can just ask what you're actually looking for. If you want to know what your income was last year, instead of trying to remember, like, oh, I need to put in the year, I need to remember exactly which tax form this is, I need to remember what part of the tax form actually contains this information. Let's offload that to the AI and let's just ask it, what was my income last year? Because that's what you're actually looking for. And on the back end, the language model is going to be doing this kind of RAG over the documents on your local machine, where it's going to try to understand what you're asking for, then it's going to find the relevant documents, and then it's going to look in that document and find the relevant sections and look for things that are going to answer your question effectively. And what's really cool about this kind of being personalized is that you don't have to rely on these big technology companies like OpenAI or Google or Facebook to create language models where you have to upload all of your personal documents to them, or they get to see all of the questions that you're answering. In this case, it's much more private. You aren't paying any external companies, and they also don't get to see any of your data. So you get to retain the privacy aspects as well.
Well, I can't wait for that to happen. That would be just really wonderful. And then it would be really great if it just spoke to me. So I asked a question like I'm asking you, and it replies just like you're replying to me. That would be the ideal. I think it would make people really happy to have a technology. And I'm sure that's where we're headed, as you mentioned.
Well, I think that's the ultimate goal for really any of these technologies, is that we want to get to the point where humans spend the most time doing things like coming up with the questions that they want to ask, and they don't have to waste their time doing the trivial things like going to the actual document and finding that information themselves. So it's a much more straightforward way of kind of interacting with a computer system, where you don't have to remember all of the intricacies of which key clicks you need to do, what buttons you need to press. You just talk to it. You say, do this for me, and our language models and the AI technology that we have will be advanced enough to be able to understand the intent of your question and also know how to actually do it. So it's going to be integrated well enough with whatever system you're using to be able to actually take those actions that need to be satisfied to respond to your command with the appropriate text or take the appropriate actions that it needs to do.
Right. And I think Square, you mentioned how Square works. It's quite a few steps in that direction, especially for companies, because it's really working internally. It's not, Square reads what a company's documents are. That reads those documents and makes its decisions or its answers based on it's finding within its own workspace, as opposed to, a chat GPT or Bard or, any other platform that works externally.
Yeah, and kind of based on the progress and the direction that we're going in, we just kind of see this as a natural progression of what we've already been doing. So back before we had computers, people just had stacks of boxes with papers in them. And if you wanted to answer a question, someone had to go to the room that has the files, and they have to rifle through the file cabinet to find the document that they want, and then they need to find the answer. And obviously, that process can be really, really slow because you might have to look through box after box after box to find what you're looking for. And then computers came along, and instead of having a whole room with a bunch of boxes and filing cabinets, now it's all just on folders on your computer that's stored on a hard drive in terms of bits, like zeros and ones, somewhere on your computer. And when you type into the search bar, if you know the name of the document that you're looking for, you can just type in the name and it just pulls it right up. And obviously, that is a huge help because you no longer have to physically search through all those files to find the one you're looking for. It just pulls it up immediately and you can just start searching. And so I think Square, being able to search in natural language on your documents is just an extension of that process that we're already going in, which is instead of looking for a particular document to find the information that you're ultimately looking for, let's just ask the computer what you're looking for, and let's get it to just answer it directly and show you where that came from.
It's really great. So we've talked a lot about RAG and how it's become important in what we've seen in the latest innovations with AI, and especially with Cognistx Square. So if anyone who's listening is really interested in seeing Square in action and seeing how it could work with your business and your documents, just contact us. You can contact Cody at Cognistx.com, or you can visit Cognistx.com/Square and read more about our AI-powered enterprise search and the power that it has and how it can be applied to your business and how your employees can use it. So, Justin, I want to thank you for joining us and explaining how RAG works. And as I said before, I want to encourage everyone to visit the website and reach out to us. And if you have any suggested topics or questions, please email us at info@cognistx.com. Thanks so much, and we'll be back in a few weeks with another new show from AI Driven.
Thanks for listening in. Learn more about how AI drives what we do at Cognistx.com.